Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Salam Sejahtera and Suki Hontu. Welcome to all our local and international participants to the conference of the application of religion and science to ecology and sustainability, perspectives from Islam and Buddhism, or IBED. I'm SL Chong, one of the two MCs for this conference. Just a quick introduction of myself. I am the editor of Dhammajoti, the first Buddhist songbook in Malaysia that has music notation and more recently, information technology to Buddhist organizations. Thank you all for participating in this historic conference where Muslims and Buddhists come together to deliberate and formulate practical applications of religion and science to pressing issues that we face in ecology and sustainability. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the organizers of this conference, the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, or ISTAC-IIUM, Muslim Youth Movement of Malaysia, ABIM, Vajrayana Buddhist Council of Malaysia, VBCM, Theravada Buddhist Council of Malaysia, TBCM, Tibetan Buddhist Culture Center of Malaysia, TBCC, International Students of Islamic Psychology, ISIP. Thank you to our organizers for having the vision and compassion in organizing this crucial and timely conference in the face of current threats to ecology and sustainability. These threats are no longer academic, but are very real and have come knocking at our doors, as can be seen by the changes in global weather patterns and most recently, the worst floods in Malaysia for 40 years. We have a truly international panel of speakers and moderators who are subject matter experts in the fields of religion, ecology, and sustainability. So please do stay with us for the entire conference. Before we go into the first topic of today, we are pleased to announce that the same meeting link will be used for both days of the conference, and you may remain in the meeting for the entire day without having to leave and rejoin for subsequent sessions. Also, please note that all participants have been muted when joining the meeting. The Q&A session will be held after both speakers have completed their presentations. During the Q&A, please use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that you wish to ask a question. The host will then request you to unmute, upon which you must click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. You may then verbally ask your question. After you ask your question, the host will mute you or you may mute yourself. You may also ask questions by using the chat function in Zoom. For our audience who are watching in Facebook Live, you may also post questions in the comments. However, do note that priority will be given to those who ask verbally in the Zoom session. Our first topic for the conference is Topic 1, Knowing and Caring of Nature, an Islamic and Buddhist View. The speakers for this topic are Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan binti Baharuddin from UMCCD, and Venerable Professor Dr. KL Dhammajoti from Malaysia, with moderator Mr.Tan Leng Huat. I now have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for this session, Mr. Tan Leng Huat. Mr. Tan graduated with a diploma in Buddhist studies from Kelaniya University, Sri Lanka. He is the president of Dhammacakka Buddha Vihara in Malacca and immediate past president of Theravada Buddhist Council of Malaysia. He pioneered chanting in unison for Malaysians, and he also initiated virtual Sunday Puja and Dharma sharing, hosted by MSBS. He actively promotes and shares Sutta studies online in Malaysia. And now, without further ado, I now hand over to Mr. Tan Leng Huat to continue the session.
Good morning. Selamat sejahtera, Suki Hotu to all. Contrary to the belief that religions do not play a role in ecology, a group of very learned Muslim and Buddhist friends got together to organize this Islam Buddhism Eco Dialogue, also known as IBED in short, with the main theme application of religion and science to ecology and sustainability. Perspectives from Muslims and Buddhists. I'm Brother Leng Huat, the moderator for this session. We have with us two very prominent speakers on this subject of learning and caring of nature. Our first speaker is Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan Baharuddin. Professor Datuk Azizan Baharuddin is currently the Director of Center for Civilizational Dialogue, University of Malaya, and UKM YSD Chair for Sustainability, Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment, University Kebangsaan Malaysia. She was also the former Director General of Institute Kefahaman Islam Malaysia, also known as IKIM. Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan Baharuddin received the BSc Honours in Biology from the University of Tasmania, Australia in 1978, MSc University College London in 1979, and PhD in Philosophy of Science, Science and Islam from the University of Lancaster, United Kingdom in 1989. She specializes in several areas such as bioethics, interfaith, intercivilizational dialogue, Islam and science, environmental ethics, and religion and sustainable development. She has published more than 200 books, book chapters, monographs, journal articles, and newspaper articles in above mentioned fields. She's active in several governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, connected with the area of specialization. She's also a member of various advisory and consultative committees for the ministries in Malaysia. With no further ado, we shall now invite Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan to share with us her views on caring and knowing of nature from the Muslim perspective. So over to you, Datuk, Professor.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr.Tan Leng Huat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia, Datuk Profesor Osman Bakar, Brother Faizal Aziz, Venerable Professor Dr. Dhammajoti, Brother Pek Chihen, fellow speakers and moderators, chairpersons and members of the organizing committee, distinguished guests, Tan Sri, Datuk, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be with you and a very good morning to everyone. Before I begin, please allow me to make a small prayer. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Firstly, I would like to express my very deep gratitude to the organizing committee for inviting me to share some thoughts in this very important conference on the application of religion and science to ecology and sustainability, perspectives from Islam and Buddhism. Can I have the first slide shown, please? So my topic for today is, as mentioned by our Master of Ceremony just now, Mr. Su Lim Chong, knowing and caring of nature and Islamic perspective. Next slide, please. Just to summarize, this is what I hope to be sharing with you. We need, first of all, to understand the current realities, causes and effects of unsustainability. I know the experts are well versed, but I think we need to share more with our community. And then we need to look at the critical role of religion and spirituality those of us who are in the realm of guiding people in spiritual terms, we need to imbue some knowledge of the environment, the hard facts of nature, if you like, in the guidance that we provide to our followers. And then I will focus on specifically Islamic perspectives vis-a-vis the harmonization of science and religion, or scientific knowledge and religious knowledge. I will look at some efforts that have tried to restore the balance between the physical and the spiritual. And I will highlight the need for all of us to change our worldview. And finally, we will look at some practical solutions that has been highlighted just now. Next, please. I think all of us are familiar with some of the images on this slide. We can talk about corruption, we can talk about infanticide, kind of social ill. We used to be surprised and shocked when we see babies being thrown, as in the picture. We are overwhelmed by plastic pollution, forest fires, very dry, extreme weather. But I'd like to draw attention to a piece that was published in our local newspaper. The title is Apathy Unlimited. Because we are so used to looking at these images without maybe thinking very much about it, we are described as people who are apathetic. It no longer touches our heart. So I think this is something that is spiritually related, and we need to come back to this later. Next slide, please. So most critical, we are now facing what is called climate change. And again, I am very concerned about the issue of making people understand. So perhaps one way to make people pay more attention is to look at human health. So this is the effects of climate change, extreme weather conditions on our health. So you can see because of air pollution, we've got several diseases. Because of changes in the vector ecology, we've got malaria, dengue, respiratory allergies, waterborne diseases. We have on the social side forced migration, civil conflict, and mental health impacts, and so on. Yeah, and this we will come back to again also. But I think this is a chart that is useful to carry with us and remind ourselves. Yeah, even the recent floods, we know, will be causing some diseases, mental and physical. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. I think we need to introduce this word Holocene, and after it Anthropocene. Yeah? This is geological, describing the Holocene is the current geological age that we are in. It began approximately 11,700 years ago after the last glacial period. So it means Holocene means entirely recent. It has been identified with the current warm period and corresponds with the rapid proliferation of growth impacts of the human species worldwide, including all of its written history, technological revolutions, civilizations, transitions to urban living. Next. Okay, these are some of the issues that causes climate change, and basically we are not guided sufficiently, or we have unintentionally gone beyond the limits of nature, and many of the Earth's capacities, physical capacities in terms of water, in terms of oxygen, in terms of all the things that we need from nature, all the capacities have been breached. For example, when we look at the carbon dioxide increases, this has led to the loss of water catchment areas because of the extreme weather conditions, and this has led to some catastrophes like floods, and all of these are due to the destabilization processes. And all in all, when we lose forests, when we lose natural resources, we lose supplies for our needs, such as medicines from the plants and the forests that are abundant, supposed to be abundant in our environment. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, the Anthropocene is something that is close to us. And what is the Anthropocene? Just now I spoke about the Holocene. Holocene is the period that started 11,700 years ago. Beginning the year 1945, scientists have indicated that we are now into another age, geological age. And in 2007, these scientists, Will Stephan, Paul Crutzen, and John McNeill, for example, this was in the year 2007, they published the first scientific paper which brought the attention of the world to the idea of the Anthropocene. See, Holocene was something very natural, but beginning the Second World War, specifically with the drop of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, human beings, because of the impact of industrialization, because of the impact of the increased use of science and technology, which we have mentioned just now, just not been guided properly with ethics and respect for the limits of nature, we have now become a force of nature that are overwhelming the conditions of the earth. So again, sorry, we have to look at these pictures again, but this is something that we keep looking at it, but perhaps we don't quite understand what's going on. But believe it or not, these are the effects which we will suffer more and more if we do not change our ways, if we do not change the way we do our economics, the way we deal with our natural resources. So this is something that is with us now, the Anthropocene. It is not much used yet, yeah? But imagine this, previously the earth changes because of physical conditions that took place naturally. But beginning middle of the 20th century, human beings as a species, as a natural species on the face of the earth, are overwhelming the earth. So I think this needs to be underlined via whatever means that we can. Next slide, please. And perhaps we don't quite look at the changes. We just look at the physical changes that happens because of climate change. But climate change affects socio-political parameters leading to wars and conflicts. There will be competition over resources, not just oil, but also water. Future wars might be conducted because people are competing for water. In the last 30 decades of the last century, statistical research pointed out to heat waves, droughts, and other natural disasters, which increased because of global warming, pushing countries into armed conflicts, particularly those already split along ethnic lines. So we should take note of this. It might not be so far. I think today, next slide, please. This new phenomenon of refugee influx is with us. There's a group of migrants now called environmental refugees, and this is a priority for almost all governments of the world. More than 1 billion out of 7.9 billion human population today are migrants or refugees. There are roughly 74 million forcibly displaced persons, 31 million refugees because of disasters in the year 2020, 3 million asylum seekers, and 40 million internally displaced persons. So it would seem that people are running away not only for political reasons, but also primarily because of environmental reasons. And both the political and the environmental issues are interlinked. Next slide. I think we should be extremely worried that climate change, which is one of the major effects of the Anthropocene, or human beings interfering in the forces of nature, in the balances of nature, is the effect on food production. We are, believe it or not, on the brink of looking at the food crisis. And some mitigation efforts, for example, include biobanking or the establishment of seed banks. But today, in the economic sense, people are also questioning that certain people are monopolizing these seed banks. So again, when we have good solutions, but when we don't have ethics, when we don't have a deep spirituality in persons or groups that are in charge, then mitigation efforts can be sabotaged. So this brings us to the issue of the rising gap between rich and poor. Yeah? And this touches upon our economic system. So when we speak about practical solutions, we must not only tackle the physical problems, but we need to tackle the economic problems, beginning with the systems that actually ensure our economic sustenance. So we need to balance the earth capital with the human capital and the financial capital. Next. From the Islamic perspective, when we look at the Quran Karim, we find this ayah, Surah 30, verse 41, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Corruption has appeared on land and sea because of what people's own hands have wrought, so that they may experience or understand something of what they have done, so that hopefully they will turn back. So the key word here is fasad, which means corruption, which if you look up the dictionary means all that is negative, all that is rotten, all that is imbalance. Yeah? So to Muslim theologians, for example, this ayah tells us that it is not that the Creator is abandoning human beings, but human beings have brought the problems upon themselves via their own hands. And we saw very briefly in the beginning how we did that because we overstepped the boundaries or the limits of nature. So what is needed now is for us to turn back to the proper ways, to the proper understanding of how nature should be respected, should be handled, how resources should be managed. Then perhaps we can come back to normalcy. This is what we hope to do. Next slide, please. So among the religious spiritual audience also, some may ask a question, when we have these so-called calamities and human sufferings, we ask the question, what are the real causes of the losses? Are they the result of God's fury, or is it the result of man's folly? So do the calamities have something to do with the moral behavior of the victims, or are they outcomes of negligence and lack of respect for the limits of Earth's capacity? So this is, I think, the key question that we are talking about, focusing in this seminar. And I think to answer it, we definitely have to, as the title of the presentation or the session says, we need to actually care. But before we can properly care for nature, we need to know nature. We need to understand nature. The knowledge of ecology, oikos, logos, the study of home has to be highlighted. It has to be put in the curricula of religious studies, for example, and vice versa. In the curricula of economics, in the curricula of ecology subjects, STEM subjects, science subjects, you have to embed some values which actually come from religious views. Next. So we speak about worldviews, the way we look at the world, and today the dominant worldview is the man-centered. Briefly, it says that man is the measure of everything. By his reason alone, he can know and solve everything. Resources are infinite. Other species are of utilitarian value only. And this view is very much in synchrony with extreme materialism. Everything around us has value only if you can sell it, if you can buy it, if you can gain from it. Yeah? And unfortunately, sometimes this view is also put upon the human being, the human body itself. So people are selling organs, for example. So this is a very dangerous worldview. So we have to guard against this. In the West, or when I say West, the West is not a specifically geographical West. In a secular, in a world that does not accept belief systems, for example, we have the life-centered worldview, wherein man is not the measure of everything. Reason need to be aided by something else, by values. And there need to be an understanding, and for this you need scientific literacy about ecology, about nature. Resources are actually finite. limits do exist, and then once we transgress the limits, we cause imbalances to happen in nature, and these are the things that causes the catastrophes that we are witnessing. So the material dimension is to be balanced with the spiritual dimension. So this is where perhaps today we need to speak about a new worldview wherein religion and science are harmonized. Next, please. I'm sorry to have to share this image of the human being, but I think it's very well known that one of the crises underlying unsustainability today is the issue of the loss of meaning of the self. Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go after we leave our bodies, for example? So we can explain this in purely religious terms, or we can, but I think if you explain it in purely religious terms without recourse to the hard facts of the conditions that we are in, it might be a slow process. So this is just an example. Okay, so poverty today exists not because we cannot feed the poor, but because we cannot satisfy the rich. So there's an issue with wealth. There's an issue with wealth that is pursued without meaning, without justifications for it not to be shared. So in the 10th International Congress on Obesity, for example, there's an estimated 1.5 billion overweight people globally, and 10 years later it is 1.9 billion and so on. And in 2019, 39% are obese worldwide. Yet in developing countries, 1 out of 10 children die before the age of 5 due to malnutrition, and 690 million people, which is 21% children, are perpetually hungry. So when we say there's a crisis of meaning, it has practical impacts, especially in terms of the gap between rich and poor. So this is some things that we address. And you might say, what has this got to do with knowing nature? Well, ourselves, we are part of nature. Our physical self is the closest nature, quote unquote, that we live with. So if we cannot take care of this nature, small nature that is us, how can we be taking care of the bigger nature that is the earth around us? Next, please. So we'd like to highlight the importance of spiritual intelligence. Today we speak about IQ, intellectual intelligence in the serial processing term of the word, meaning of the word, and then we speak about emotional intelligence, people being good at sensing the emotions of others and their own emotions, and then they manage their emotions. But then I think we need to highlight also the importance of the spiritual intelligence, and it plays a greater function. So spiritual intelligence is the innate human need to connect the self with something larger than itself. So the Quran, for example, says spiritual intelligence is an integrated intelligence that deals with questions of existence and creation, and it provides a model regarding the texture of human intention, morality, law, and social interactions. So spiritual intelligence is the ability with which we exercise goodness, truth, beauty, and compassion in our lives. Spiritual intelligence implies presence of intuitively gifted knowledge and soft skills that includes one's worldview and purpose of life, the ego, the self, plus the awareness of the universe and laws of the divine. So the seat of spiritual intelligence is not only the brain, but also the qalb, which is the heart. So I'm sure in religious traditions, there are literature in this, but the point is that the audience that we are looking at today need also to be educated in terms of the scientific facts. Next. Even science itself is actually a spiritual enterprise, because scientists talk about being inspired through the sense of awe that they feel when they are studying nature. And from a purely non-religious perspective, scientists are saying that those who dwell among the beauties and mysteries of the earth are never alone or are never weary of life. So they feel that there is a kind of spirituality in doing itself and in doing science itself. And of course, for the person who is religiously inclined, the Muslims, for example, talk about the role of tadabbur and tafakkur. This means relating what we observe in nature with what is revealed. And then there is the importance of the kauniyah verses in the Quran, which means there are verses that actually refer to objects and phenomena and events which are present in nature and history directly. And then there is a significance of the group called the Ulul Albab, and these are the people who never fail to reflect on the phenomena of nature as signs, ayah of the greatness of the Creator. Next. So in a macro global scenario, the United Nations climate chief, Christiana Figueres, has condemned climate change as one of the great humanitarian issues of our time, she says. She argues that faith leaders must take a stronger stance against it and encourage their followers to do the same. And saving the earth and its people from dangerous climate change is an economic, social, and environmental issue, and it is a moral imperative. So religion is the last hope for giving solutions to the climate issue. How do we manage this Anthropocene from continuing to affect us, from continuing to destroy us? Next, it is by changing human behavior. So a lot of research done by so-called non-religious scientists, social scientists. One is done by Paula Posas, J. Posas, for example. And according to her studies, she finds that there is a pivotal role of religion in issues of climate change and environmental justice that hinge primarily on religion's functions in society, ethical teachings, reach and influence, and ability to inspire adherence to action. Religion's ability to inspire action is evaluated empirically against data from 2 compilations of religious activity on climate change. And the analysis indicates that significant religiously based involvement and influence on ethical aspects of climate change, and it points to much greater potential for the role of religion in future solutions to the climate crisis. Our own research has shown that what is needed today is a change in the morality, is a change in the attitude. We need to drop the greed, like we said in the previous slide, there is enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. And that is a moral statement. And only religion is the only discipline that can address that idea. So even non-religious social scientists are supporting the significant role of religion in addressing climate change. Next. So this is just to capture again what we just said. Religion has a major role to play today in addressing climate change. And that's why, as said earlier by our brothers, this conference is extremely timely. And the role of religion is empirically verified. This is a strong statement. What we mean here is that people who are not so keen on religion, for example, always think that religious ideas are unsubstantiable. I mean, they are not verifiable empirically, but we'd like to differ because as we tried, and we'll continue after this if we have time, empirical verification is possible. And religious ability and function is through its ethical teaching. And ethics is something that we need to demystify. What does it mean to be ethical? And why is it important that we have ethics? What happens when we don't have ethics? And there is a great potential for the role of religion in future solutions to climate change. And this is very much emphasized because it is linked to the, as we said again and again, the ethical aspect of climate change. Climate change has a big aspect that is linked to ethics and morality. Next, even locally, religion or the value of religion in development has been acknowledged by our country's leaders, yes, from this article. Next. So in one sentence, if you like, to summarize, does the Islamic perspective have a solution to offer? Yes. So we call this the sustainability imperative. So you're familiar with these three circles, 1, 2, 3 circles, superimposed on one another. This is the so-called sustainability crisis image that we often encounter when we look at global efforts. So Muslim scholars and scientists have given their own interpretation of this, and for them, what we need is justice, what we need is wisdom, what we need is innovation, and this will impact the maslahah or the public interest. So without these four tools, for example, or these ideas, it might be difficult to find the right center, which is sustainability. Next. And one example of such a scholar, scientist, engineer who is bringing in a religious dimension into the work is Professor Arjayusi. And for him, pollution and corruption are due to the loss of unity between man, nature, and the creator. And there is a need for a fake LBR. If you notice, I'm using both the scientific terminology and also the so-called religious terminology. This is to show to you how this empirical verification is very much part of our thinking. So we need in the laws that talk about the environment, religious laws that talk about the environment, we need to bring both forms of knowledge together. And that is the need for transformational leadership to address the threats of climate change globally. And the global debate on climate change needs to be informed both by religious discourse regarding trusteeship or amanah, because Muslims in the Quran are created to be khalifa or to hold the life on the earth as a trust. And a holistic approach, which is called the green jihad or striving. Don't be scared of the word jihad. It means linguistically striving. And ijtihad, innovation, and zuhud, moderate living, are the principles that are being stressed. Next. Yeah. So we bring us to the main table of discussion. So the whole world, 183 countries or more, perhaps, have ratified this declaration that we will support the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is to be fully implemented or achieved in the next couple of decades, for example. And it begins with no poverty, and then no hunger, and then good health, and so on and so on. So if Muslims look at the religious law, if Muslims look at the principles that the Creator has laid out in the Book of Revelation, we come to the idea of the maqasid of the Sharia, the objectives of the religious law, which is what? Which is number 1, protection of religion. Number 2, protection of life. Number 3, protection of intellect. Number 4, protection of lineage. Number 5, protection of wealth or economic means. So it has already been studied. It has been more or less accepted that there is nothing wrong for Muslims. In fact, Muslims are encouraged to work towards the success of the SDGs because doing so would also partially mean, at least, that you are carrying out the objectives of the religious law. So next, I have this picture also because on the left-hand side is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Maslow, as we know, did not belong to any religious group, but then just relying on his empirical research, and this hierarchy or pyramid did come out as a result of his study. So he himself have pointed out the needs of the human being before he reaches self-fulfillment level. Right? So it begins with basic needs, and then psychological needs, and then self-fulfillment needs. Now, if you study this properly and you sort of compare it with what we just explained in terms of the maqasid Sharia or the objectives of the religious law, you find that there is a kind of harmony. Yeah? So this is again what we mean by religious injunctions in terms of addressing climate change or the issue of unsustainability is very much empirically verifiable. Okay, and for Muslims, the middle picture shows the three relationships that has to be maintained. There is the relationship between man and man, man and nature, which all hinge on his relationship with his creator. That is why the religion has to be taken in total. Some people believe in theory, but they don't practice. Some people believe in terms of ideology, but they don't practice. So for Muslims in Islam, the practical dimension of religion, the rituals, if you like, but make sure that you understand what lies behind the rituals. I think this is part of the problem in religious life. Some people like to understand, quote unquote, but then they don't like to practice and actually do things. Yeah, but this is not right, because as Maslow already shows to us, our needs are real. Our physiological needs are real. Our security needs and so on and so on. So all that hinge upon our practical way of life, which is what religion is supposed to guide us in. Next. This is just to again summarize the Islamic model to address climate change. The three components is green jihad, ijtihad, zuhud. We've already looked at this, and this speaks well to the belief among Muslims that Islam is a total way of life. Next. This is just to capture the idea again in a technical way, but at the end of it all, green development can only happen through education, and this will lead to a people-centered or life-centered way of doing things. And what is particularly important is that the financial system is in line with the spiritual religious system. Next. So what we need to focus upon, as we already been asked to remind ourselves just now by Brother Su, we need to look at what action plans do we have or can we have on the table. So I'd like to draw attention to some of these logos. These are the people whom we've been working with throughout the years. And most recent, I'd like to draw your attention to the second poster, Al-Mizan, Islamic Covenant for the Earth. And this is the latest effort by a group of Muslim scholars and scientists in terms of declaring to themselves and also to other communities in the world, this is what Islam is supposed to aim at vis-a-vis, taking charge of what needs to be done in the world today. Before that, in 2015, the same group, more or less, came up with what was called the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. This was in 2015, and this declaration was actually passed on to the people attending the Conference of Parties, or COP 16, I think. Next. So this, interestingly enough, this Islamic Declaration of Climate Change was presented in Turkey, and one of the important audience that it was presented to is a group of multi-faith leaders. We presented it in that meeting to Buddhist scholars, to scholars of many other religious and faith groups, and there was no conflict in terms of what was to be understood from that declaration. So next, I will be talking a little bit about this Islamic declaration, because if you ask a question, so what do Muslims declare themselves to be wanting to do? So I think this declaration captures that spirit. So in the declaration, it's just a short declaration, 2 pages only, but it contains the preamble, the what's, the why of climate change, It contains the affirmation section, which is the Islamic view regarding environment and climate change, and then the suggestion of call for responding to the way, which is what the word Sharia means, and responding by living alongside the Makasih Sharia. And there is a to-do list for stakeholders, citizens, leaders, governments, corporations, etc. And next. So, first of all, in the preamble, Muslims affirm the fact that, the belief that it is Allah who has created the universe in all its diversity, richness, and vitality, that we human beings are created to serve the creator of all beings, to work for the greatest good that we can for all species, individuals, and generations of God's creatures. Next. The declaration stresses the principle of balance or mizan. Allah is the Lord and sustainer of all beings. He created the earth in perfect equilibrium or mizan. The earth functions in natural seasonal rhythms and cycles, and a climate in which living beings can thrive peacefully. And the present climate change catastrophe is a result of the human disruption of this balance. So this specific admission is an important one, because amongst some groups in the world today, there is refusal to believe that it is human beings that causes the disruption in balance. And as we've stated right in the beginning, beginning the year 2007, scientists themselves have acknowledged the fact that the Anthropocene is a reality. In fact, they are giving that geological name, the epoch that we are in now. You know the Earth in terms of geological age are given different names, different titles. So they would like the Anthropocene to be something that is accepted and to be taken action upon. Next.
May I interrupt you a little bit, Professor?
Yes.
We have exceeded our time a little bit.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
So let me just go to the very final slide where we look at the community. Last slide, which is number 36. Number 36. Yes. So 36. Where we have the boys. Next one. This wakaf is talking about how religious wealth, zakat and all that can be used to help the environment. This is, we'd like to remind ourselves, somewhere along the line, the so-called experts, religious or scientific or whatever, you have to go down to the ground level, speak to the people, speak to the youths. This is what we did, and these youths in Kuala Selangor area were educated in terms of the environment, and they formed a youth club to take care of the environment. So thank you so much. Billahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Brother Tan.
Thank you so much, Datuk Professor Dr. Azizan. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay,
actually, it was very interesting. I was actually following that very closely. That I also missed the time, Okay. Anyway, I think the key word here is Professor Dato is focusing on is ethics. She's saying that the abuse of nature, we exploit nature due to economic reasons. And only through religion that we can overcome this greed element that leads us to too much of economic reasons, and we exploit nature. And that, I think, is my take-home point from what she said this morning. Anyway, we will go through that a little bit further during the Q&A session. So our second speaker today is Venerable Professor Dr. K.L. Dhammajoti. Venerable Professor K.L. Dhammajoti is a Malaysian monk who is a renowned Buddhist scholar, especially on the Northern Abhidhamma doctrine. He taught at the University of Kelaniya, Sri Lanka for 22 years and subsequently joined the University of Hong Kong as a professor in early 2004, retiring in 2015. Presently, he is the chair professor at School of Philosophy, Renmin University, China, and director of the Buddha Dharma Center of Hong Kong. He has published several books, including Savastivada, Abhidharma, Doctrine and Controversies on Perception, Reading Pali Buddhist Texts, Reading Buddhist Sanskrit Texts, and numerous research papers on Buddhist studies. He was also the founding editor of the Journal of Buddhist Studies of the Center for Buddhist Studies, Sri Lanka. Venerable Professor Dr. K.L. Dhammajoti has received several awards, fellowships, professorships, and honors from the universities around the world, including Tripitaka Visharada in 1996 by the Amarapura Sri Sadhammawangsa chapter of Sri Lanka, Professor of Buddhist Studies by University of Kelaniya, Glorious Sun Endowed Professorship by the University of Hong Kong, Chair Professorship by Renmin University of China, Rector Emeritus by the International Buddhist College, Thailand. Venerable's life mission is to promote integration of Buddhist studies and praxis and the discernment of the Buddha and his Dharma beyond sectarianism for ministries in Malaysia. We have heard the views from the Islamic perspective. Let us now invite Venerable Professor K.L. Dhammajoti to share his views from the Buddhist perspective. Over to you, Venerable Professor Dr. K.L. Dhammajoti.
Good morning, distinguished leaders and speakers and guests from the Muslim community of Malaysia and worldwide, venerable members of the Buddhist Sangha, distinguished colleagues and friends. My slide will be a simple one. Without all these beautiful illustration charts and statistics. And I must first thank the previous speaker for relieving me of all this and giving you a lot of technical details and statistical analysis. For one thing, I'm not an expert in all this, so I prefer to focus directly on the Buddhist perspective on this issue and to show that Buddhism has worldview on this to offer. Because I think I will be given only about, perhaps, hopefully a little bit more than 30 minutes. And so I must try to confine to this limit, and I would therefore prefer to just more or less read from my slides, but there are places where I may need to elaborate. Yeah, so first, the current crisis that has been well illustrated and highlighted earlier. And Buddhism, of course, certainly is or has always been aware of this crisis. It's not just a current crisis, it's a crisis of mankind. Buddhism uses the word dukkha, which means the unsatisfactoriness of the human predicament. And one reason for this predicament is the loss of balance, you can say, in the context of this conference, between man and nature. Now, the current human suffering of the COVID-19 disaster is a very concrete exemplification, that the very survival of human beings is being threatened by the imbalance of the human ecosystem. Through this pandemic that we are experiencing, and also the ongoing climate change crisis, etc., nature is in fact sending us a powerful message. Exploiting and putting too much pressure on the natural environment can have catastrophic consequences. We must now accept the fact that if we can't take care of nature, we cannot take care of ourselves. And this is the central point of the Buddhist perspective I hope to share with you. I fully agree, in fact, that the real solution can only be sought, must only be sought within the domain of religion. Undeniably, intellectual and conceptual consideration and analysis of the problem are necessary, and that has been well done just now. You have seen that. Necessary, but not sufficient. Ultimately, the true solution must be a religious one. I put in inverted commas. I shall explain why. This, I believe, is the significance of the present conference. A solution is possible only when the total man, this is the Buddhist perspective, not just his mere intellectual, comprising, the total man comprising his cognitive, and affective aspects. When it's only when this total man, the totality of the person is involved, and also at his very deepest existential level, that a solution that threatens the whole of humanity become possible. Here we come to the word religion and why I put in inverted commas. And of course, I'm not talking about religion in the institutional sense. For one or better term, I might call it the Freudian sense. And just now we saw the previous speaker also quoting Abraham Maslow. And in fact, besides Fromm, there's a whole group of humanistic psychologists and psychoanalysis, and they speak of a kind of religion, you might say, in the humanistic sense. So here, religion is conceived as a sufficiently broad scope one to include all forms of religions. That is, humanistic and non-humanistic. Of course, not necessarily atheistic. Borrowing from Erich Fromm, very broadly, religion can be defined as a frame of orientation with an object of devotion. That applies also, of course, to science, etc. In any human endeavor, any devoted human endeavor. There's always a frame of orientation to which the person is committed to, and that is the final ultimate object devotion. Fromm, in fact, argues that religious need, in the true sense, is rooted in man's very existence. So in this sense, we call religion an existential need. And therefore, it is not a question of choice. A humanistic, human-centered type of frame of reference, such as Buddhism, should progressively lead us to higher levels of the unfolding of the human potential, along with the attainment of ever profounder insight. According to Buddhism, much like what the modern humanistic psychoanalysts and psychology professors say, the goal is a fully actualized man. According to Buddhism, at the stage of the highest unfolding of spiritual insight, the word used in the Buddhist text is panya, Pali, or prajna in Sanskrit. This insight transcends that of ordinary intellectual and conceptual knowledge of the ordinary person. We, at this level, this highest level, according to the Buddhist teaching, we can directly and truly, that is to say, free from conceptual superimposition, see that all humans, not all sentient beings are one. That's the important message. Stated in terms of the doctrine of what is called conditioned co-arising, that is the central teaching of all schools of Buddhism, all beings and all phenomena are necessarily interconnected and interconditioned. Every event that occurs in space-time does so when and only when dependently conditioned by other existent factors. In fact, we can only exist in relation to, being conditioned by nature. There is also another important Buddhist doctrine in this context, that is the doctrine of no self, or elaborated in somewhat later stages of Buddhist development called emptiness. Early Buddhism expresses this term in terms of no self. That is the fact of interrelationship. The fact that there's no isolated, totally independent existence of man, or for that matter, any existent. The Northern Buddhist school, Buddhists, speaks of emptiness, shunyata. The highest spiritual insight is that no individual truly exists totally isolated from all existence, sentient and non-sentient, including nature. I shall also introduce you first to the early tradition, that is the Pali tradition, to a discourse called the Karaniya Metta Sutta, that is loving kindness to be cultivated. This discourse exhorts us to cultivate a mind of boundless love towards all living beings. And the term for living being is Pana Bhuta. And significantly, this includes all that are mobile as well as stationary. Tasawa, Tavarawa, Anavasesa, without any remainder, covering, in other words, the animate beings, men included, and not confined to men, as well as plants as well. In fact, man and the whole nature. So this discourse exhorts us to cultivate a boundless mind. Boundless in the sense of not having any discrimination in terms of the object of the radiation of this love, this loving kindness. And it is to be cultivated in the manner of, it says, a mother willing to risk her own life to protect her own nature. Imagine that, if we can cultivate that kind of mentality towards nature, that is true caring and loving nature. And today, we will not be suffering all these disasters resulting from the imbalance of the ecosystem. Earlier, you saw a discourse from the early tradition. In the Northern Buddhist tradition, an important teaching is called collective karma. It teaches that the totality of human spatial temporal experiences, all experiences, that is of ourselves as well as our environment, are necessary, though not fatalistically, the result of our own actions. Not fatalistically because it is in fact on the very basis of the working of karma, the principle of karma, of cause and effect, that we are endowed with power as human beings to change for the better. We can also change for the worse. We have to be responsible for our common future. And this is collective karma. So all the experiences are on the one hand, this is on the one hand determined by karma, and of course this is personal karma as well as collective karmas. That is to say, we are responsible for ourselves, for our own future, but at the same time, we are also responsible for what happens in the totality of phenomena existent. What happens to nature that's being exploited? What happens to the negative reaction and response to nature? As a result of it, we are having all these disasters. The happiness or suffering of each single individual is intrinsically linked then with those of others. And to rescue humanity from environment disaster, man must practice and not just think and analyze and argue. And this practice is in fact the creating of karma, personal as well as collective. Of creating karma, loving and caring nature. No one can be truly healthy if nature is sick. This is the Buddhist message. We come to another stage of development of Buddhism, the domain of what is called Abhidharma. And I'm referring mainly to not Abhidharma, it's also Mahayana. Continuing with the emphasis on karma, which is both personal and collective. Let me quote the teaching of Sarvastivada Abhidharma, and from an authoritative text called the Mahavibhasa, the huge encyclopedic commentary on the Abhidharma doctrines. For reason of time, I shall quote only very, very briefly. In fact, it's a very lengthy description. And that's actually extremely relevant to us because it speaks of the relationship between human actions and the response from nature. So it goes like this, part of it. In a cyclic human nature evolution, when the karma path of killing prevails, the different karma path, killing, stealing, lying, and so on, etc. So killing first. All external things lose their luster and vitality. That's a response. That is the effect of collective karma. And all external things cannot endure long. It continues, when the karma path of stealing prevails, what happens? All external things suffer calamities. There are disasters resulting from frost, pollution, and so on. And these are concretely experienced today, etc. When we have, on the other hand, restrained, or when we have relinquished the karma path of killing, then all external things mostly regain luster and vitality and endure for a long period. So it goes on like this about killing, stealing, and all these immoral actions. So the more behavior is very, very much emphasized. But I feel that the additional message is that it is even the word morality is not sufficient for this kind of descriptions. So it means that this, as a part of the contemplation for the solution of the imbalance of ecosystem, one must understand, one must think in terms of for one of better, the spiritual dimension. And these are natural responses to our positive or negative, wholesome or unwholesome behavior, which Buddhism calls karma. Let me now introduce to a very interesting discourse. This is in the Mahayana, and the text is extant in Sanskrit, a very ancient text. It's been translated in English. It's called the Vimakirti Nirdesha. The story is like this, that Vimakirti is supposed to be a layman, very interesting. This is a person living in ordinary society, but he is of profound wisdom. And one day, the Buddha knows that he is sick, and the Buddha wants to send someone to inquire about his sickness on his behalf. And all the distinguished disciples, right, with great wisdom, one after another decline to go on his behalf because they are all scared of him, because he is a man of such great wisdom and often very sarcastic, and they can't face him. To cut the story short, eventually there's a bodhisattva called Manjushri who undertakes, who knows that he must go on behalf of the Buddha. Nobody else would like to go. So when he goes there, the first question he asked Vimalakirti is, "Sir, why are you sick? What is your sickness?" And here we have an extremely profound and interesting answer. Vimalakirti says, "Because all sentient beings are sick, I am sick." If I'm translating all this very literally, just now what I've shown you earlier from Mahayasa, also a very literal translation, and you can look for yourself some important messages. If the sickness of all sentient beings cease, then my sickness will cease. Sentient beings have been sick all the time, spiritually, and hence I continue to be sick. So the totalistic, the most holistic conception of health is that no one can speak of health truly unless the totality of existence is healthy. He goes on to say, just an elder having only a single son, when this son gets sick, the parents too become sick. When the son becomes cured, the parents too become cured. And all modern physicians know this principle. If one is sick, if you get COVID, the whole family get COVID. The whole society get COVID. Now, millions of people have died. So the solution cannot be just confined to a particular country, particular race, nationality, religion, and so on. It's a totalistic one. Then he says, continue, likewise is a bodhisattva. That is to say, a practitioner of the Mahayana path in relation to all sentient beings. So the Buddhist teaching of condition called arising implies that all existence are intrinsically linked, mutually conditioned, as I said earlier. When nature is made to lose its balance, we become sick accordingly. When nature restores health, we too come to be truly healthy. There's an important word in Buddhism here. That is called yoga shema. This is the term here. Yeah. Anwen in Chinese. That is true security. These days, people speak of lack of security, a sense of insecurity. The true security is true harmony and peace of mind. And that can only be achieved in a holistic, totalistic manner. Let me now, I think we have gone through over time. Yeah, we have a little bit left. So, yeah, we have come to the conclusion now. Perhaps I can slow down a little bit. I was running. The first point is from our discussion. Given the teaching of condition called arising, which means that no existent, whether human, non-human. This is the Buddhist view. The Buddhist view is not just human-centered, world-centered, earth-centered, but it's a all-embracing view of the totality of existence. And existences, no existence can exist independently in an isolated manner. They are mutually conditioned, just like the waves in the great ocean. When even one wave moves, the whole ocean is impacted. When there is turbulence in the whole motion, each individual wave is affected accordingly. That is why when nature is sick, we cannot alone be healthy. So given this teaching of condition co-arising and emptiness, the need and responsibility of loving and caring for nature, I'm using this highlight, which is the theme of today's discussion, that Loving and caring for nature, we can answer now, is in fact intrinsic to the Buddhist doctrinal system itself. Buddhists have no choice. It is within the doctrinal system. 2, we can have true security. That is to say, true health, true happiness, true peace, only when we strive to make nature well. When nature is sick, we too become sick necessarily. And that is the powerful message we should have got from reading the Vimalakirti discourse that I quoted just now. Finally, our collective responsibility is certainly of utmost urgency. We don't have much time left if we want to save mankind. But we need not despair. There are laws in nature that look after us, and we must be aware, we must learn to understand and apply and to conform to the laws of nature in this striving. From the perspective, particularly the Buddhist perspective of the karma doctrine, this is definitely, in other words, the solution is definitely a possibility. It's a definite possibility. So I think I have just slightly gone through the main points, and we have come to, I think, 30 minutes. And I'd like to thank you by way of concluding. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Professor. Thank you, Venerable Professor K.L. Dhammajoti. At least my take-home point here is dependent co-origination. Well, Venerable focuses a lot on dependent co-origination. That is, what we do affects nature. And when nature is sick, we cannot be well. That is my take-home point from Venerable today. Anyway, it is that means we are part of nature. And I think it will be very parallel if we were to say, I think it's very parallel to what Professor Datuk has said earlier, that we are integral part of nature. We live with nature. Yeah. So with that, I think that is a similar path. We are going in slightly different direction, but with the same cause, with the same goal, which we are saying that we are all part of nature. We must respect nature. We must give up greed to overcome nature. Ethical behavior. That's what our Venerable and our Professor Datuk Azizan has said. Yeah. So with that, now we shall move on to the Q&A session. So for the Q&A session, please use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that you wish to ask a question. The host will then request you to unmute, upon which you must click onto the microphone icon to unmute yourselves. You may then verbally ask your question. After asking the question, the host will mute you, or you may mute yourself. You may also ask questions by using the chat function in Zoom. For our audience who are watching on Facebook Live, you may also post questions in the comments. But do note that priority will be given to those who ask questions verbally in the Zoom session. Okay. So with that, we open the floor for questions. So please use the raise hand icon for us to identify you. Do I see any raise hands yet? If not, then maybe I would like to. If not, then let me post some simple some questions to both Professor Datuk and Professor Venerable Dhammajoti. Now, what do you think that we as lay people, as normal people, the general people can do to support learning and caring of nature? Maybe we will let Professor Datuk, Dr. Azizan help us first. What do you think the lay people like us, the general people, the normal people can do to support learning and caring of nature?
Okay, thank you so much, Baharuddin. I often ask that question myself. Every day, I try to work out what it is that I can do in a small way, in a big way. I think this is something that everybody like to think about as well. You know, we showed the slide just now about the plastic pollution and all of that, right? So most simply, we all work in offices, in institutions, in houses of worship, right? And we eat and drink, right? And most simply, do we still have to drink from the plastic bottles? And if we have to, what do we do with the plastic bottles? Is it so hard to get a glass container that is refillable, right? And some non-plastic glasses to drink from? And then in the house, our household wastes, is it so difficult to separate the organic from the non-organic? We might say that, these are minor things, but if you put millions of tons of waste from millions of households, right, then we get what we saw in the pictures. And we know in the oceans, for example, turtles, other sea creatures, they get, the plastic that is at the neck of the plastic bottle, encroaching on their necks, and they cannot grow, they cannot breathe properly. And then we know plastics become microplastics, they're ingested by fish, we eat the fish, and the plastic comes into our body. Exactly what have been described by Venerable just now. See, when nature is sick, then you cannot be healthy. So we are inseparable. So do we understand that? I think just to get that notion understood and then to be acted upon would be a tremendous victory on our part, to address the situation. And then of course at the higher levels, policy making, economic decision making, we can do much more in terms of enacting laws or regulations, right? But then again, it's up to the so-called religious person, spiritually enlightened person, to actually do and act upon what they believe. Also already, I think explained by Venerable, and also I think I stress upon that point. But most critically, speaking as a Muslim, we believe that the CCTV of the Creator is on us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. We'll be taken to task later on. The Creator will ask us, what did you do? Did you do the right things or the wrong things? So this I think is not something familiar in the religious curriculum. But then it is something that is recent, but we also showed the Quranic verse. It is already spoken about in the book of Revelation. So we Muslims, for example, what are we waiting for, right? So you talk about conscience. You all have conscience. Do you not have conscience? Conscience is the secular word, if you like. But in the spiritual language, it is the heart. The heart does not lie. People can quarrel, where is the heart? Is it on your head? Is it in your chest? Where is it? But everybody knows, and again, scientific research is showing that the heart is actually more intelligent than the brain. I don't want to make statements that are not verifiable. Why is it that I keep on talking about this? Because we face a world that sometimes say that, many people in the world claim that they are religious, but what they do not seem to tally with what they say. Which means there's something in their minds that does not click yet. The spiritual and the worldly is still not harmonized. So for us Muslims, what you do here very much affects how you will be in the next life. If you don't do well here, the key word is do, It's not simply like the Venerable also said, it's not just theory, you have to practice it. Hence the importance of the rituals. Rituals are being laughed at. Rituals are being laughed at. People laugh at rituals because they don't understand the meaning behind rituals. So I think what is critical for religious teachers is to actually explain the meaning behind rituals. I emphasize the word meaning because there's also the crisis of meaning in our life today. So I'll stop there. I think we should give Venerable opportunity also to respond. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Datuk. Yeah, actually, yeah, I like that part when you say that people like us should do and not only say. I think that is the take home today. We should do and not only say. That's what Professor said. Yeah. Okay. Now let us hear from Venerable Professor K. Dhammajoti.
Okay, I hope that we have both highlighted the importance of very first beginning point, the starting point, that is awareness. There must be awareness of the situation, of our dilemma, of the disaster. This is one thing. And I quite appreciate the point that we must act and not just think. Yeah. And that is why I say that the solution involves a total man. And I say the solution is a religious one in that sense. And in the sense of whatever religion we belong to, but religion in the true sense, in the existential sense, of involving man's sincere, fundamental response to the human predicament. And it's only when you come to the state when you're able to respond like this that you will be motivated to act accordingly and systematically. Then we can speak of a solution. And for Buddhism, there are concrete methods. What can we do? And of course, we can give many examples from the technical, scientific point of view, and Professor Azizan has given some, like avoiding plastic and so on. In Buddhism, there are concrete methods. For instance, talking about loving and caring, it's not a question of understanding what is called condition for arising, but the heart must be motivated, must be affected. Then action follows, and then these actions are very concrete. For example, we have the practice of loving kindness. Just like I quoted one sutra, one discourse, which exhorts to radiate boundless love to all living beings. And this all living beings, very interesting, not just human, not just enemy, but all inanimate being, the whole of nature as well. Yeah. So there are concrete methods. In fact, even steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do you start doing loving kindness? No, we have no time to go into detail, but let me assure you that you can find the concrete methods. A method of breathing, of becoming more aware that you don't exist alone, but in your breath, in your breathing, in your mindfulness, you are aware of the totality of things. Yeah. So there are. This is, for instance, anapanasati, vipassana, and there are concrete methods, and this is what perhaps Buddhism has to offer. Another thing is talking about involving the heart. That's a very important message. That's why I say the solution is a religious one, because heart must be involved. It's not a philosophical one. Yeah, it's not one of scientific theory either. In fact, they're all much necessary and have. I say necessary but not sufficient. So Buddhism emphasizes one aspect of motivating the heart. That is through aspiration and vow. There's a word for it called pranidhana, vowing, making vow. And this is a key concept of, for example, Mahayana Buddhism, the bodhicitta. You feel that you live in constant awareness that you have a mission, and that mission is to save yourself and nature, and that total salvation does not exclude yourself. It's not a question of sacrifice yourself for the sake of nature, for the sake of others. It's you and others cannot be separated. To save others is to save yourself. To benefit nature is to benefit yourself. That's what I was trying to talk about. Finally, a word. Let me speak a word about ritual that is highlighted by Professor Azizan. And again, I fully agree that, you know, people, like she said, people laugh at ritual and think that it is superstitious, it's irrational, you know, starting by people like Sigmund Freud and so on, thinking that, highlighting that ritual is sickness, is neurotic. But fortunately, we have a group of psychoanalysts, psychologists, the humanistic one like Maslow and Carl Rogers and so on, you know, and they highlight the importance of ritual in the development of human being, in the unfolding of the human potential. Particularly, I like to emphasize for instance, we know that Maslow speaks of the actualization of man. Yeah, so the whole potentiality must be progressively unfolded. That is religion in the true sense. Of course, it can take a particular form. It may be Muslim, it may be Buddhist, it may be Christian. These are particular forms of it. But the essence of it is the unfolding of human potential to the highest. And because time is short, I share with you his analysis of ritual. He says that ritual is extremely important, but he makes a distinction between rational and irrational ritual. Okay, so irrational, anything irrational, of course, is not healthy. Sure, it is basically neurotic. But there is the very important, what you might call religious or spiritual significance of rational ritual. And he defines like this. I'm just speaking out of my mind. I might miss one word, something to this effect. It is a shared action, expressive of a common striving, rooted in common values. So it's first of all an action, something to do. You don't invite the ritualist and follow a manual and just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or let others do for you and you pay for it. And I think this is in some circle, for instance, of the Chinese Buddhist community. That's a wrong understanding. The ritual must be done for yourself, and that very doing is a practice. It's a meditative practice. What happened is, okay, action, ritual is a shared action. So you do it collectively. You invoke, inspire collective common inspiration. This is the first thing, in doing it, in the very doing of it. Right? And that is an expression of common values. That is to say, the externalization of the aspiration, the vow, for instance, now today, the need to help nature to be restored to harmony. Yeah. So if you have that, if you get the message from this conference, yeah, if you have a sense of mission, you must actualize it. And there must be a concrete method. And ritual is a method. So when you do the ritual, you are externalizing your inner yearning, inner aspiration for the welfare of nature and yourself, of humanity. Yeah? And this, so shared action, expressive of common value, expressive of common striving. It's a striving, it's action rooted in common values. So I think it is an excellent definition given by a psychologist, a great thinker like Freud. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Venerable Professor. Thank you so much. Yeah, we will take it as awareness is a very important criteria here. And also, like Venerable has stressed very strongly, the shared action, experience of common inspiration and rooted in common values, which are actually parallel to what Professor Datuk has said, do and not just say. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Now we'll move on to the questions in the Zoom chat. I have a question here. Anyway, if at any time we feel that this answers has already been answered somewhere else, please just we can ignore. We can skip the question. Yeah. So the question here is Dr. Azizan. Ironically, it is the religious people who oftentimes ignore the impact of climate change. So how to reconcile both the man-centered view, mostly modern Western view, and life-centered view, mostly religious or pre-modern Western view. To resolve the climate change, can modern science be the common language between the two? This question is directed to Professor Datuk Azizan.
Thank you so much for the question. Einstein once said, without religion, science is blind. And without science, religion is lame. Now, please don't get upset. Religious people, please don't get upset with Einstein. I think what he meant was that religion, critical as it is, oftentimes needs to be contextualized. So I think religious teachers are doing fine. They are teaching principles of religious belief. So we need them to be pure, quote unquote, in terms of their teachings. Yeah, let's not burden them with now having the latest scientific knowledge about climate change, for example. Whose job is that to tell us about what's wrong in the world in physical terms? That would be the scientist's job. But the difference here is that there has to be mutual acceptance and mutual respect between these two groups, the scientists and the religious teachers. If you can get both types of knowledge, well imbued in the one and same person, that's good. But sometimes that's difficult to achieve. So that is why we need to meet like this, where we put together side by side scientific knowledge, as well as religious knowledge. Take the best of both and harmonize it. The word is not to equalize, the word is not to flatten out, the word is to harmonize scientific knowledge and religious knowledge. And that's why I keep repeating empirical verification. Now, it is not a high and mighty scientific ruling, this word empirical. It means having recourse to experiences that your senses can experience. Like, okay, people always say believe in the ghaib, believe in the unseen, which is what let's say for Muslims, you cannot see God, so God cannot be real because you cannot see God. You want to see God with your eyes, you cannot see God with your eyes. But then the word see has to be demystified. Okay? Experiencing God is something that is you cannot discuss it in purely empirical terms. That it is a meta level. It's a deeper level, but nevertheless, you still have the heart. You still have the organ called the heart. Yeah, but the heart is both physical and spiritual. So this is, I think, what religious teachers are trying to get at. Look at your heart. Look at the state of your heart. And we Muslims believe that if the heart is pure, if a person concentrates on purifying his heart, and this is what religious rituals are aimed to do, to purify your heart. If you do the rituals with meaning, then your heart will be receiving guidance from the Almighty. Now, all that is religious language, which is very difficult for people who are not in tune with that kind of thinking to accept. So that's why we go to Maslow, right? I think Venerable also mentioned Maslow. Maslow did not claim he was from any religious group. He did his work totally based on empirical knowledge, just based on the senses that everybody has. And so he came up with this hierarchy. How come he said that a person can only realize his true potential, right, after all his needs have been met? So this is something that spiritual leaders must understand, perhaps, that if a person is poor, if a person is not educated, if a person is illiterate, is perpetually hungry, dirty, then he will not be in the condition to accept the best religious enlightenment. So that's why we must work from the bottom up and top bottom as well. So I think for Muslims, it's an imperative. That's why the Makasih Sharia, it talks about economic wealth. Why is economic wealth, economic sustenance important? Because without it, a person cannot pray properly. Without it, a person cannot think properly. So what I'm getting at is just now the question is how do you get religious teachers to understand the facts of climate change? By, first of all, scientists who know about climate change talking and explaining things to the religious teacher. And the religious teachers or religious leaders themselves have to actually acknowledge the fact that books of revelation, I mean the verses of revelation, verses of the Quran for Muslims, for example, has to be thought about, has to be contextualized. Like I use the verse 30, verse Ar-Rum, Surah Ar-Rum, chapter Ar-Rum, verse 41. Fasad is clearly in the air, in the water, on land, because of the hands of men. And God really deliberately make us feel the consequences of that, so that we might turn back. Can we actually understand that chapter fully, that ayat fully from that chapter, if we don't understand the facts of climate change, for example? So I would very, 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 very humbly ask my so-called fellow science friends with science background, climate change background, to have discourses with so-called religious leaders. And there are many, 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 many religious leaders who on their own also are aware of all these scientific evidences. So the key word here is dialogue, I guess, and a lowering of the ego. What we often see also is a kind of snobbery, intellectual snobbery on both sides. One side will say, oh, you do not know about science, and the other side will say, no, you do not know about religion. So I think both are in error, spiritually speaking. And I think the bottom line is the purification of the heart. If our hearts are pure and we aim for nothing but enlightenment and for Muslims to be close to what the Creator asks us to do, then we would have no hang-ups. What is the problem? If a person don't understand, make him understand. If he behaves as if he is putting you down, then that is your own pure bad perception. Sulzon, I mean, you think negatively of the other, and this is a dosa. This is misguided behavior as far as Muslims concerned. So to be religious is actually to have good akhlaq, to have good morality, to have good ethics, to have good behavior. This is critical in Islam. The Prophet is sent to make better the akhlaq, the behavior of human beings. And he is sent as a rahmah for the whole universe. This is what Muslims believe. So the question is, why aren't religious leaders, I'm talking about all, maybe one or two, perhaps, I don't know, misguided, perhaps, I don't know. Why can't we believe in that and practice that? Again, keyword is practice. Keyword is don't look at other people. The Prophet said, judge yourself before you are judged. Weigh yourself before you are weighed. In other words, you must always be looking at yourself. And I think this is not something difficult for everybody to understand, and it's just that it is not emphasized. Someone asked a leader, what is the heart of education? And she said, education of the heart. You must tarbiyah your heart first. You must educate your heart first. And how do you do that? Through religious practices and theory and practice. So I think I'll stop there, Brother Tan.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Datuk Azizan. That was very enlightening. Yeah, you have quoted, without science, religion is blind. Without religion, science is lame. I think that is very, very true. I think that is where science and religion, like what we're having a dialogue today, science and religion must come to some agreement somewhere. Yeah. And then these rituals that we do, like what Venerable Professor Dhammajoti has said, these rituals, some are rational rituals, some are irrational rituals. So don't just say that we want to believe things that we can see. Sometimes we experience them. That's what our Professor Dato has said. Yeah, if I've understood you correctly. Thank you so much. Okay, the next question we have, next question in the chat group we have is directed to Dr. Venerable Dhammajoti. Okay, the question is, I think Dr. Azizan's use for life-centered view better reflects Buddha's teaching than human-centric view. The sixth extinction due to man-made climate change, which has caused the demise of many non-human species or lives on Earth, should be something very alarming for Buddhists in the first place. It is exactly this human-centric interpretation of the Buddha's teaching that give rise to many Buddhist ignorance of the impact of climate change. Do you agree with me?
I take this partly to be just a comment, but there's a question towards the end of it. And
Yes.
I may not fully agree, I'm afraid. Buddhism, the Buddha has explained the human predicament, human situation. He explained what is called dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, has analyzed the very cause or causes of unsatisfactoriness of this predicament, has declared that there is indeed a transcendence of this predicament, has finally offered a very concrete actual path leading to that transcendence. So many, so of course, the Buddhists are human beings, just like even Muslims, even Christians, and even the so-called scientists. They all have the different views, different understanding, and there will be some misunderstanding. Yeah, but I have emphasized one thing that Buddhism tells us to cultivate towards the experience of no selfness. That no selfness is very, or expressed in terms of emptiness, is very often misunderstood. Yeah? It doesn't mean that emptiness doesn't mean the denial of all existent phenomena, for example. It's not even the denial of the individual. So likewise, for the question, the doctrine of no self doesn't deny the individual in the empirical sense. There is the self that moves on the experiences, but that self, according to Buddhism, is a conditioned one, conditioned by all factors that give rise to this phenomena called yourself. And these factors involve not the intellect, not just the brain, but your feeling. We're talking about a lot today like this. Feeling, your emotion, your aspiration, your volitions, and so on, the so-called aggregate five skandhas. So the Buddhist path is a process part of transforming that. And the ideal is one of universal emancipation. As I say, that does not exclude yourself, but that must begin with yourself. If you cannot care for yourself, you can't care for nature. Conversely, if you don't learn to care for nature, you cannot care for yourself. But then you are the concrete existence yourself, and yourself is more concrete to you, in other words. And you have to start with yourself, your own frustration, your own. These days, there's a very common, very popular word called depression. After I have come to Hong Kong, I realized that Buddhists are talking a lot of depressions, and they say they come into Buddhism because of depression. They want to find a solution to it. Often I think that this kind of a mentality, this kind of psychological state, I say not absolutely, not always, but often, is, I'm afraid, the result of the taking over of Western kind of mentality, Western kind of value that I hinted at in my sharing. Yeah, and you know, yourself being the most important. You're not a true individual. You're just individualistic. As I must be good, and my good must be exclusive to the good of others. If I gain more money, I hope my neighbor will collapse. The next company will collapse. Now, it's not that kind of individuality. I think that kind of negative individuality is very much a part of the Western value system. I'm not anti-West, I must say that, but I see that as a very, very important source of our problems. And this applies to the whole issue of ecological imbalance also. You know, you want this system to be okay, to be fine, to the exclusion of another system. The person is a system. Your neighbors, your families, your society, these are all different systems. A world, this world, that world, this domain of existence of sentient beings like humans, and other domain like animals and so on. They're all different systems. Yeah. So if each system cares and love and learns to love only the individual and cannot broaden that system, in Buddhism we say, you know, the ideal is to broaden it to totality. Yeah. Then there is no true harmony. So However, the message is that you must begin with your system. You yourself learn to love and accept yourself. And many problems today, mental problems, because human beings cannot learn to accept themselves. With all your imperfections, we are all imperfect. We cannot expect, we are not enlightened beings. We are not Buddhas, we are not Bodhisattvas, we are not Arhats. Accept ourselves as we are, but we have a committed goal. Common good, common peace, common health. Yeah? And not only the goal, but a path. Just talking about action, yes, we must act, we must feel the heart, but how to act? So to be aware also. Today you learn to, you might learn to be aware. I hope that is at least the outcome of this conference, if not more, to highlight the awareness. But being aware is not enough. Your awareness will be lost tomorrow, for example. So there must be ways to cultivate constant awareness to it. Yeah. So what I was trying to say in my sharing is that Buddhism offers a perspective of very concrete methods like meditation. Extremely important. Without meditation, all talks about involving the heart, all talk of the need of actions from the Buddhist point of view will not be very helpful. Because however much you know you want, you should do, you can do, but you can't do. You don't do. Yeah. So in other words, what is the solution? The solution is to transform your consciousness within, starting from yourself. And to transform it, there's no other way than meditation. That's why meditation is central to the Buddhist path. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Professor. So we'll go to the raise hands question. We have got very limited time, so we will try to answer 2 or 3 questions from the raise hands. Okay, for the first question, let us invite Dr. Muhammad to speak up, please. Dr. Muhammad, please unmute yourself and ask your question directly, after which please mute yourself.
Yes.
We can't hear you, Dr. Muhammad.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you, Prof. Dr. Azizan, and Venerable Professor Dr. Dhammajoti. Thank both of you. I think, well, very generally, I have just 2 points, which lead to 2 questions. Number one is that both speakers speaking in the context of Al-Ghazali's Mazra'a. Mazra'a here meaning the concept of cultivation sphere, cultivation land, like Ad-Dunya Mazra'atul Akhirah. So now conceptually, both Islam and Buddhism, so regardless of their perceived sources by their adherents, so they have come together to deliver a universal message. And that universal message is the concept of do to others what you want others to do to you. So others here underlined, so includes the nature. So whatever we do to nature, we expect back from nature. So now the nature, from the speech of the both, I understand that it is our collective responsibility to safeguarding the nature, to preserve the nature. It is all our collective responsibility, whether we are Muslims or Buddhists or whatever else. So, and to protect this, it requires collective efforts. But now, how do we settle down with our individual misinterpretation of our religious responsibility towards nature? So this is, so how do we harmonize our human nature in order to achieve our climatic collective responsibilities? So that is one. Point number 2 here is our talks here, many talks like this in conference, webinars are this. They are mostly on intellectual level. They do not practically translate to individuals down the street in the markets. So now, how do we translate all this down to individuals on the street, in the market, in the society, in our compound? So these, I think, are my 2 points for both. Thank you.
Who shall answer first? Venerable Professor Datuk? Oh, sorry,
Me?
Professor Datuk?
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful comment and also question. I think we'll go straight away to the last question being posed, how to translate all our theories and action plans down to the level of individuals. I think back to the fundamental principle, if you claim yourself to be religious, then you have certain duties. And what is that duty? To be true to what you believe in. So the Muslim, when they pray 5 times a day, every time they pray, they say, Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Say, my prayer and my life is for Allah only. And when they say that, do they realize that it means that doing the right and proper thing? It has already been established that doing right to the environment is the proper thing, is the religious thing to do as well. So ibadah, or our service to the Creator, includes not only the rituals, but also our everyday life activities. So you say, like, if you go to the market, how do you practice it in the market? Okay, if you are a seller of things, stop using plastic containers to sell your goods. If you are a buyer, a customer, stop using plastic bags to carry your goods home. Carry a bag made from cloth or something that is decomposable, right? Okay, at a slightly higher level, we pay zakat, and Muslims are very good at giving infaq or charity. They call it wakaf. Yeah. Recently in Malaysia, the ministry in charge of the environment and water has promoted this idea of wakaf for water, wakaf air, which means you can contribute money that will go into assisting projects that can either preserve water or find water for people who are in need, etc. So this is like translating your so-called religious beliefs into reality, into real life. When you shower in the morning, how much water do you use? I'm sorry to have to be, like in the words of the Venerable, so statistical, so measurable. Well, because people want to see evidences, they want to hear about tangible things to do. Well, these are the tangible things to do. So stop asking the question of how can we help? There's so many things you can help with. There's so many manuals. You can Google the stuff that you can do. Save electricity. Those who waste are the sahabats of shaitan, the friends of shaitan. That's what the Quran says. How much do we waste in everything? I've just read a paper last night that talks about the millions of tons of food being wasted in Ramadan, for heaven's sakes, in so-called countries that claim to be religious. So what's going on there? So you see, it's very easy to look around and say what is not good with the others, but look at yourself and what good have you done. And scientifically speaking, if you have a pond and you throw a little bit small piece of stone inside the pond, you will see ripples. Immediately around the stone, the ripples are quite huge and visible, but later on, believe it or not, the ripples spread out. You don't even see it in the last stages, but it covers the whole pond. So similarly, every good deed that you do actually impacts your environment. I think this can be explained spiritually as well as scientifically, but we don't have time today, but believe in it. Believe that other people have worked on this. It does work. Okay, how many people are zooming in our conference today? 400, 500, 1,000? So if this individual do something small, believe it or not, it will spread. The goodness will spread. How will it spread? Other people will be looking at you. Your children will be following your example. So let's not make that question a big headache, because we are running around asking that question. If you like, if you're interested, brother, you can Google the Islamic Declaration for Climate Change. You didn't have time just now, but in my slides towards the end, there are the do's and don'ts. And it all started with the Prophet himself. He gazetted areas that are forbidden to be destroyed. He gazetted areas for people to use the resources from it, for example. So I think all in all, I'd like to say this with the greatest humility, because I'm sure my knowledge is just so little. Yeah, there is so much in the literature that we can look at. And why can't part of this literature be explain to the audience during khutbah time, where you have lectures in your houses of worship. Why can't the so-called religious leaders, they can probably request from their scientist friends to have some information that they can share. So, and the understanding all along is that doing good to nature is an ibadah, is a form of religious service. Isn't this the important thing? So the here and now, the Anthropocene is here. We have done damage. When I say we, the human species, then you can say, no, it's not me. Yeah, but then you have been consuming all these things all the time yourself. And that's why it's no use designating the West versus me versus the West. No, we are all part of it, because everything that you buy, that you use, that you eat, that you consume comes from the same market that is actually dominant in the world today. So we are part of that worldview that we don't like. So we have to start small, big, medium, up to you. But I think most critical is we don't hurt each other, we don't make each other angry towards each other. You understand that? That is the most important thing. To begin with, let's make peace with each other, make peace with ourselves. Don't stop blaming. The Venerable keeps saying, don't give up, don't blame yourself. Don't blame yourself. So for me, how does a Muslim do that? I was just reading Surah Al-Ahzab this morning. Remember Allah always. The Buddhists might use the word meditation, I don't know. But for Muslims, zikirullah. Remember Allah. Praise Allah. So this is what people don't understand. Why do you say astaghfirullahalazim all the time? And does that work? Yes, it works. Try it. Yeah. So I'm talking about religious principles in a manner I think that is very, very layman. As a person who believes in Islam, what do? I try to practice. I try to understand. So I think this is the best that we can do. And along the way, if you've got knowledge about the environment, how to help them, do it and believe. And if you can't believe, you are not impressed, you can ask people who can explain it to you. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Datuk. I think for the interest of time, we shall now invite Venerable Geshe Tashi Sering to ask a question. Please unmute yourself, Venerable Geshe Tashi Sering. You are muted.
Yes, I have. Thank you. So my question is to both of previous speakers. And I totally agree, both spiritual traditions have beautiful, profound teachings and messages, and both traditions, true practitioner, put into practice. I have no doubt on that. But how can we take those beautiful and profound message and practices to the outside our spiritual traditions, to the common people? If we are more or less quite clear, if we use or say quote from Quran or quote from Buddha's teaching, then go to the common people, this will not quite clear, this will not work. What is the solution to take to the university, to take to the college, to take to the school, those beautiful messages? What is the means and methods to take those beautiful messages without quoting the Quran or the sutras? Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable. So we will direct this question to Venerable Professor K.L. Dhammajoti, and then we shall end this Q&A session, because we are back to back with the next program.
Yeah, I think the common thread to the Venerable question and not to the previous question is a question of common platform or common language, right? One, common to the scientists and the so-called religionists, common to the the meditators and those who are deep into their religions, and also to the so-called outsiders, the word they used by the Venerable. Yeah. Now, early on, somebody has suggested that the scientific language can be the common language. I cannot agree with that. And in fact, in some form of so-called scientific language, it can be essentially anti-religious. Yeah. But rather than therefore emphasizing on the commonality of the scientific language, I think we should emphasize on the commonality of the religious experience of all human being, whether scientists or religionists, whether specialists or people, folks on the street. Yeah, the heart is the same. Okay, human existence is the same. Human existence, if you're human, you exist as a human being. You can't escape that. Whether you are a common man outside, or whether you are a monk or nun, you know, whether you follow this particular religion, or whether you say I don't need religion, which according to from you is wrong, because religion, the need of religion is rooted in the very existence of each human is sentient being. Yeah, you can't escape it. The only choice you have is to choose which kind of religion that suits you. Yeah, that helps you. But you cannot say no. I'm clever. I'm intelligent. I'm scientific, and I don't need religion. Only the emotionally fragile people need religion. You can't say that, because it's rooted in your own, in man's very existence itself. So therefore, I think if you speak of common language, common experience, is not the specific forms of, you know, this language, that language, whether it's the Quran, whether the Buddhist scripture, whether it's the Bible, and so on, but the very innate experience of human being, that which no human being can escape when you exist. Yeah, and this is the experience. So to be religious, I was trying to say, and in fact I'm largely quoting from, but I'm added perhaps some of my own comments, that true religiosity consists of not going to the temple and bowing to the Buddhas, or, you know, praying in front of in a church or wherever, but consists in man's deep, sincere response to man's own, I'm sorry I use the word man, I don't mean to be a male chauvinist, the human predicament. You feel it's so, the question of where I go, what is the purpose of my existence, how am I related to nature, how am I related to all sentient beings, so deeply that you make a sincere response. And that response must be a systematic one. In that way, there is no outsider, no common man. No one is common, no one outside or inside. Yeah, it applies. When your heart is touched like this, even if you are uneducated, you feel that the predicament of human existence, the predicament of human being. Yeah, even a beggar can feel that. A scientist also needs religion in that sense, in the Freudian sense, because he needs a frame of orientation to orientate within. And he has a goal, he has some committed values to achieve. Yeah, so I think the important point is to appeal to the true religiosity, not in an institutional sense, but in the existential sense. To appeal to the heart must move in this way. Then that is the language. And that language, of course, in predicate terms, can take different forms. So, you can, for instance, follow the Quran, you can follow the Buddhist scripture, you can follow the Bibles, and so on. But it must not be just at the institutional, superficial level. It must be at the level of the heart, must be at the level of a human existence.
Thank you, Venerable Professor K.L. Dhammajoti, and I hope that answers your question, Venerable Geshe. Okay, we don't have much time left. Actually, we have moved into the other session time already. So with that, I think we shall end our session by saying thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of you for logging in, and for following our program. And now I hand over this platform back to the MC of the whole program. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tan Leng Huat, and also our speakers, Professor Dr. Azizan binti Baharuddin and Venerable Professor Dr. K.L. Dhammajoti, for a wonderful and insightful session. I'm sure everyone enjoyed listening to their points. I am now pleased and excited to announce that our next session will be the inaugural opening address. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is currently based at Dharamsala, North India, is not able to attend this online conference, as his whole office, including the audio-visual team, is in lockdown mode due to the recent COVID-19 surge in that part of India. Nevertheless, we are delighted to inform that his representative, the Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul, will be able to attend and address the inaugural opening session. We will also have an introduction by Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Osman Bakar of ISTAC IIUM, and the session will be moderated by Dr. Awani Ghazali of University of Malaya. So now our guests and VIPs for that inaugural address have arrived and taken their places. I will now hand over to my co-MC, Mr. Adli Zakwan, to continue the conference program for the inaugural opening session. Over to